2 minutes, but I'm gonna pull up on YouTube
Yeah,
too
and it
just
says
to
to me,
double check.
yeah, StreamYard says we're in the show, but I'm not looking, I'm not seeing it on the.
Interesting. Yeah, that should not be happening. Yeah, it's not showing up on my phone either. Um, oh, I
There
mean,
we
it
go.
says, okay,
So let's do all that again.
okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Buddy Read live discussion of Iron Widow by Xiran Jay Zhao. Apparently, we weren't live, but now we are. So, thank you so much for sticking with us. Hi, Michael Schotter. Thank you for joining us today. Michael Schotter is also a science fiction writer. He is the author of The Nemesis Effect, a science fiction book that everyone should check out. I'm joined here today by Michael from Fit to Be Read. We buddy read this book together, Iron Widow, a young adult science fiction, the first in the in the Iron Widow series. Not sure how long it's going to be, but I'm excited to be here for the journey. I'm going to start with a synopsis, and then anyone who has comments or questions about the book, feel free to leave them in the chat below, and we'll get to them throughout our discussion. Hi, Alira. Thanks for joining us. Alright, so Iron Widow. Hundreds of years after the invasion of aliens called the Hunduns, humans have learned to fight back by tapping into their inner key, controlling giant-sized animal-shaped mechas called Chrysalis. Each Chrysalis requires 2 people to pilot it, 1 man and 1 woman. However, female pilots routinely get killed during battle when their male counterparts sap them of all their energy. After main character Wu Zetian loses her sister after she is murdered by a popular male pilot, Zetian decides to enlist herself in order to exact revenge. While paired up with him during battle, Zetian unexpectedly saps him of all of his energy, leaving him dead upon the end of the battle, and earning herself the title Iron Widow. So, Michael, what did you think of this book?
I really enjoyed it. Recently I did a video on what are my goals for 2022 for BookTube, and I mentioned that I'm going to try to read 2 YA novels this year because it's not something I usually read. I read a lot of classic and modern science fiction, but I like to see everything that's out there. And I've watched on other channels some reviews that I've seen of this book, and I thought that sounds like something really interesting I'd like to read. I was pleasantly surprised that I really, not that I enjoyed it. I enjoy everything that I read, but I thought it was a really well told story. It was well written. It was a very unique and interesting protagonist in the main character, Etienne. And it went to some places that I wasn't expecting to go to, these dark places that I found very interesting. And, I think in YA you see that happen sometimes, but this one got pretty dark in an entertaining way.
Yeah, I read young adult, but it's not my go-to. I'm more of an adult science fiction reader myself, and I kind of find that young adult tends to not go as deep as adult science fiction. This one did, though, which I was pretty impressed with. It really tackled some major issues. The one thing I wasn't expecting going into this was the amount of misogyny in this book and how it's essentially a dystopian very rooted in misogyny, but it's not a dystopian that is like, I feel like dystopian tends to take things to the extreme where it isn't always realistic. The misogyny in this book is things that have existed in history and some stuff that's still going on now, which I found was such a cool balance that the author created in this world, that it was so believable because these things exist and have existed, which I thought was brilliant.
It's interesting because you said in dystopian, sometimes it takes it to the extreme. I think this book did that with the misogyny. It took it to the extreme, but it was believable.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's this idea that, things in different places, in different cultures, things are different. We might judge things different than how we do it, but there has to be some universal standards of, like, I'm not disrespecting a culture if I say these practices are inhumane and they're wrong. And I love that the driving force for the character of Zetienne, the way that Xiran Jay Zhao writes the character, is that is the driving force. She's not trying to say, let's give all these different layers to her. And I think that's true to YA, but it
Mhm.
works so well because it's like, this is the one driving force. This is the focus. Let's not lose sight at all that this is what we're talking about, and it just drives the action throughout the whole thing. And I think it's done really, really well.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I felt like Zetien's character is very like one-sided, and I think for me, I had a little bit of a hard time understanding her character because she felt like so one-dimensional. She's just very like, she's obviously been oppressed all her life for just being born a woman, and she's just so angry about it and so open about her anger towards that. And for me, it felt like it was lacking nuance. And I think what allowed me to reconcile that is like realizing that like this is a young adult, and I think the author wrote it this way to make her very recognizable, as like her motives and I lost my train of
Yeah.
thought, but
No,
I
I
think it
like to
was
make excuses for authors too, because like I just love books, and like it's such a what an accomplishment it is to write a book in general. But it's a very
absolutely.
entertaining story, and because she entertained me, I also want to like, even if it's just me just making excuses, like I just feel like if you look at the start of this book to the finish of the book, the time frame that it takes place over, it's not years of time. I mean,
Mm.
it's an episode in her life, and she's driven by this motivation, and she never has the time to slow down with everything that's going on. So maybe, and I agree with everything that you're saying. The character is very one note, but I make the excuse for the author, like, okay, she's having this manic episode or whatever she's going through, and she's completely overwhelmed by that. We're not going to see almost any other side to her than that. And if I'm looking at it more critically, yeah, I'm going to pull that apart. But for me, it just worked because I knew what I was getting into in terms of this was going to be YA. And this isn't a knock on YA, but in YA, I'm not expecting like super character depth. I'm expecting interesting characters and action from those characters. And I certainly got that here.
It's definitely a genre thing with the YA, and I don't even think it's making an excuse for the author. Whenever an author does something unexpected like that, I always try to think, why did they make that choice? Because I always think it's a conscious choice on an author's part. And so for me, I did come to that conclusion that this was a conscious decision on the author's part to make Zetienne that like one-sided character.
Yeah. And am I correct? Do you know? I assume she's a first time author. Is that correct? Xiran Jay Zhao.
I believe this is their debut, yes.
Okay. And I think that's another thing too. Is like I feel like, and I'm gonna get inside her head, like what you said, like what were they
Yeah.
thinking? And I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it is something where I have this idea for this character in the story. She's going to do this, this, and this. These are the action sequences. Oh, but then I want this type of a relationship in here, and I want this.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of pieces that then were put together, and then the layers underneath. Which again, I'm making the excuse of it's YA, so I'm not expecting all of those layers. But those layers underneath, it was like, okay, this is my first book. I'm putting all of these things together, and I
Mm-hmm.
strung together a really nice story. Not a ton of depth underneath that, but it worked for the fact that this is really entertaining and there's a lot of action here and some really good
Right.
surprises.
I felt like the book, even from the very first chapter where we're introduced to the scene of like this mecha fight, it felt very self-indulgent. And going into it with that first scene in mind, I kind of read the whole book in mind with this is a very self-indulgent read. And even with Zetien's character, I feel like she is this feminist revenge fantasy that's what this book is trying to be. So I think there's nothing wrong with that, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that was most of the intention, is that there is like all this like fun world building and all this stuff because it's supposed to be very self-indulgent
Yeah.
while also taking on some very heavy issues too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I can totally get on board with that. I think you're right on the nose. And again, it's not the type of science fiction I'm going to go to if I'm like, I want what I'm going to get from Kurt Vonnegut or Philip K. Dick. I'm not expecting it, and I didn't want that at the moment. I'm taking a break from that, and I want a little bit of like just relax and enjoy a fun story with revenge. This is a great revenge story. You know, everything's set up for her, for us to cheer for her, like, yeah, get revenge on, and then she delivers that. You know, the climatic scenes of revenge are just like, yes, she got it.
Right.
And
yeah,
I'm
I don't
thinking
want
like Halle Berry in a movie where she's been wronged and then she comes back and gets even.
genuinely, that's what this book I think set out to do. It's just to be that revenge fantasy, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because I think about like how many books written by men with male characters that are just like these superhero type characters that are just doing badass things. Like that's kind of what this book is, and I feel like that kind of story is equally as important, but it's very easy to discredit that just because like, you know, sexism and like, oh, this is a woman. Like obviously this is like a fantasy plot, like, but it's not fair, you know? Like why should the standard be different?
Yeah.
I don't want to jump right to the ending, but also like I gotta say, like I think like the last 30 pages went somewhere I wasn't expecting, but like it makes so much sense for how the book has gone up into that point, that it's just like this very aggressive, like sought on revenge read. And I remember reading it like, oh my gosh, I was not expecting it to go there. Not in the first book, at least. I think because it's not a standalone and it's a series, I was just like, this feels really soon.
Yeah, I was curious. It was interesting when that happened too. It was almost as if I felt like the character or the author was saying to me, like, this whole revenge thing that I'm showing you, it really is as serious and as dark as I mean it to be. So if you're not catching that, here, let me give you this too, in case there was any confusion about how much revenge she's willing to do and to the length that she's going to go, that nobody's going to stand in the way, nothing's going to stand in her path to stop her from the self-fulfilling need to exact her revenge.
It's totally committed to that message, I think, and that you're right. It ends on the way that just like confirms that like I'm not messing around. Like this is
there's
happening.
An admirability to that in the writing. Absolutely, it's like, yeah, this is what I'm giving you, and it's the end of the book. I'm not going to pull back and create something different. It's a consistent message in this story.
Absolutely.
And we're rooting for her too in that moment. And it's like, should we be? But I think we are, right?
I definitely had that
saying,
moment of self-conflicting that it's like, I've been rooting for this character this entire time. And I was like, oh wow, like this is kind of going like somewhere really, really dark. And so I did have that moment of like, should I be rooting for this character almost? But I came back around.
It taps into that same feeling I get if I watch Dexter, the show Dexter, and it's like, yeah, get him. And I'm like, should I be rooting for this guy? Should I be identifying with this character?
Right. So that being said, that comparison.
Okay, there we are. Lost you there for a moment.
Yeah, sorry about that. That comparison to Dexter. Do you think Zetienne is a anti-hero similar to Dexter?
I think she becomes that at the end, when we have that point at the end, because I think all of it, I think if we're just talking strict morals that we know, like you could say throughout the book, because of the choices that she makes, but I think a lot of it is revenge that's pretty clear cut, like, this I'm gonna get this guy because of this, and it's very clear cut. At the end, it's just kind of judgment call, and then the judgment that she makes, I think, yeah, absolutely, there's evil in this person, there's villainy in her. She's still the hero, we're still rooting for her, but okay, let's now, all of our cards are on the table. To the degree that we were on with her, I think is certainly affected by that. But yeah, absolutely, I think anti-hero, and then a hero that has evil and villainy within her and the potential. If she did that, is that her climax? Is that her ceiling?
Mhm.
Or in the sequel, is there more?
Yeah, I'm definitely curious to see where her character goes in the next book, just with how bizarre this one ends. And in a way, I kind of like that she is, um, like, you understand her motivations, but her methods aren't super kind,
Yeah.
and I kind of like having both of those things together in her character, because I feel like if it was like, oh, like she's really honorable and like this wonderful person and she's gonna make change, I feel like the story it wouldn't feel realistic. And
Yeah.
I feel like it brings that realism to it, that like to have that power you need to be a little
Yeah.
devious, I think.
If we're not going to get to know her with deeper layers, then yes, give us shades of gray. And that's what we
Right.
got with her. She's not this great benevolent hero. She's got that evil inside her. I don't think that this series is going to go that way, but like I can envision what if this is like her origin story for the next book, and then she becomes the real villain, and we saw that. Okay, that makes sense that she became this villain because wow, we've seen now the inner torment that she really had from this first book, and then
Mhm.
what kind of conflict would that? I'm writing the next chapter of this now. What conflict would that create with her with other characters in the book that she's close to who
Mhm.
don't have that past, or if there's some sense of the abuse that she experienced. I mean, she experienced horrible torture and abuse that
Absolutely.
is reflective of elements of certain parts of a culture that truly actually exist. So how much did obviously that creates her character. We didn't get a look into that other than just that we know that it turned her into somebody who needs to get revenge. But could that be something that turns her into a villain and we just completely buy into it in the next book because of what we saw here, and then because we have attachment to some of the other characters that are close to her, do we root for her or do we root for them?
Right. I could almost see if this book was written from a different character's perspective, like she
Yeah.
would have been the villain, I think.
Yeah. And it
you
wouldn't be
know
it wouldn't be unique or original to have it be a situation where the person who is somebody that really cares about her, and we know their history and they're very close, that because the hero from the first book has changed, now there's a conflict between these two people that on one the juxtaposition of like the closeness of who they are in their past and their relationship, and
Mhm.
then this period where one of them maybe has to rein in the other could be interesting.
Yeah, I like that final point you said about them reining in each other, and especially with because they're a threesome at the end. I don't know if threesome's the right word, but there's she has two different love interests, and all three of them are dating pretty much.
Yeah.
And I feel like for them, like they needed the three people to create balance in the relationship. So I thought that was, well, first of all, a really cool take on the
Yeah.
love triangle trope, because I've gotten so tired of love triangles. But also to just kind of explore different types of relationships, and it's not always just like one on one. Sometimes you need other people for different things, and I
Mhm.
feel like the three of them together create this balance, and I want to see that balance continue in the next book, and if maybe that would help her kind of not become the villain in the
Yeah,
next
maybe
book.
they strengthened the two together, and yeah, it is. I mean, I can't think of another book I've read in science fiction where it's a polyamorous relationship, and it's interesting too because you can look at love triangles like you and I were talking while we were reading this over the weeks about how maybe we saw some parallels to certain elements of the Hunger Games,
Hmm.
and I'm thinking there are a lot of points when you look at this threesome, and it could be something the triangle, which does seem more cliche and common is what we saw in the Hunger Games, where you have a woman who's the
Hmm.
main character, and then you have got this guy over here and this guy over here. Who's she gonna pick? Who do we want her to be with? Which team are we on? And I've never read Twilight, but I know there was like the team this guy or the team that I don't
Yeah.
even know their names. The team this guy, the team that guy, And this wasn't the case. It wasn't like which one she gonna pick. It was
Mm-hmm.
more of a, these two guys like each other too. They like her,
Mm-hmm.
but they also like each other. And I thought it was cleverly done. Like the relationships weren't earned because the story didn't focus enough on it. It was just kind of thrown
Mm-hmm.
out of like, here's this happening. We're not seeing like, how did this really happen? But that was, again, I think, like you said, you have to think, what was the author thinking? I think that was a choice. It was like, this is how, here are the 3 or 4 stages you're going to get in this whole book that shows us how we get from none of them being together to the 3 of them being together.
Mm-hmm.
And within that structure, I think it worked fine. It's not the great love story that, if you were looking for that, but I think I don't want to use the word believable because I don't think it's obviously a fantasy science fiction story, but I think it was served well in the story, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't need it to be a focal point. I like those 4 or 5 steps that they took to get there.
Yeah, I feel like compared to just like straight up romance novels where it's like, okay, like girl meets guy and they're immediately in love. I feel like it does kind of follow that structure, but for science fiction that has so much else going on besides the romance, I think it's forgivable.
And I
At
think we got a
least
little bit with even in the
we
little
did.
bit, like you could see the Li Shimin stuff. I mean, obviously it happened all very quickly in a few pages, but there was like some levels of having discovery of feelings and stuff like that, even in just the few passages we got about it. And
Absolutely.
I think it works.
It works. Yeah, this is my summary. Yeah. Um, but I think like even upon like the introduction of the two guys meeting each other, there's that moment there where there's like a little bit of chemistry, and it was like, oh, like this is like interesting, but at the same time, it's like, wow, this kind of came out of nowhere, especially
Yeah,
considering the one guy's reputation. I don't remember his name. It's the the male pilot.
yeah.
I was gonna
Li Shimin.
Lee Shimon, yeah, Lee Shimon, yeah.
Yeah,
Like he has this really questionable reputation in this world, and for him to meet this like I guess it's unfair to say that like Yazzie is a good person because I think
we just don't know. Yeah, we don't know if he is
there's a lot of shadiness I think
likable.
implied with his family's reputation. Like his dad obviously has a lot of power in this world, and I almost got the impression that there was some sort of like mafia ties. I don't know if mafia is the right word, but like this like organized crime I think is kind of what his family's involved in, and
Yeah.
that's why he's tattooed. Um,
He's a
so
little
I
willfully ignorant of kind of maybe everything that his dad does, and but he's soft and he's tender, so we
probably
like him, right? He has more femininity to him, so he's easier to kind of warm up to. But yeah, maybe is there a quiet acquiescence that he has towards his, like, oh yeah, my dad, he's this bad business guy, but like no deeper than that.
that's yeah exactly what it feels like is that he recognizes it, but it doesn't really spend too much time on that. So I feel like his characterization as like this really soft, sweet guy, and then juxtaposed with his background, it makes him interesting. And also, I wonder if maybe that's why when he first meets Lee Shimin, that like he has that attraction towards him, because I feel like Lee Shimin has the opposite going for him. That he's this really gruff, like he's scarred all over. He's like been put in like human cage fights pretty much.
Yeah,
Um, but he has this background of like being a student and is like a calligrapher, and he has like the opposite sort of arc going for him
yeah.
up
My
until this
difficulty
point.
with Lee Shamin as a character is of all of them, he's the most cliche. I mean, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
this bad boy. Oh, there's a file on him, and like he's not really a bad guy. Like
Hmm.
we just, nobody knows that he actually knows how to read a book. It's like, oh, okay, well, what, he's not this brutal murderer. He actually is a sensitive soul, and I mean, it's been done and done, and it's
Hmm.
done to death because we like that. We like to see the bad boy actually has the soft inside, and it is evolved in ways that we're only just starting to unravel. But again, that's where this cliche doesn't work so well. Whereas I think Zetienne works well, one note, and just all revenge because it drives so much. I don't think it works in this cliche because again, we've seen this so many times that there better be something else there to make this character have appeal.
Yeah, and I feel like the clichéness of his character again goes into the self-indulgent nature of this book, so I feel like that's appropriate, but also I don't know what his motivations are either.
Yeah.
Zetienne is very motivated and he's kind of just hanging out, it feels like. He's just like getting by,
Yeah.
so.
And Yazi, what do we really know why is Yazi interested in Zetienne? I mean, there's none of that is, again, that's what I mean when I said it's not earned. None of that is spelled out. Like, we just know that they were, he was plucking her eyebrows at the beginning of the book.
Right.
But other than that, we know he's infatuated with her. But why? Like, what? Yeah, and no offense to Etienne, but like, she's very angry and she's got this revenge. Like, so what's the thing? Where's the secret sauce in her that we're not seeing? I'm not saying there can't be more to her, but where, show us something that tells us like, oh, okay, I believe that Z is into Zetienne.
I definitely had the same issue in the very beginning of the book, just because that scene where he's plucking her eyebrows, and it's like I didn't really see the chemistry there. I understood that they had this long friendship up until this point, but it also seemed like, first of all, like Zetienne was questioning why he ever wanted to spend time with her. So there's like that self-doubt coming from her, and also she has like this very aggressive, like guarded personality around him that I didn't understand where his love for her came from. It just kind of felt very manufactured and convenience for the story that Zhao wanted to tell in this book. And within like the first couple of chapters, Izzy makes this huge sacrifice where he is willing to marry Zetienne. I don't think so much out of love, but because he wants to spare her from her fate of being enlisted in the military and probably going to die from this.
Yeah.
And her being this very low class family, like, and him coming from a high class family, there's obviously going to be some uh like reciprocations towards him for pursuing this woman for a wife instead. um so I found it such an interesting scene, but also just seeing how she responds, and I understand why she responded the way she did, because otherwise we wouldn't have this story if she just decides to run away from her revenge plot and marry Izzy instead. Um, but I just couldn't ignore the fact that this was a huge sacrifice on Izzy's part, and I didn't understand exactly why. Like,
Yeah.
what
What
did
was in
she
it
do
for
to
him?
earn
We
this?
don't get that. Yeah. And I
Right.
think, and again, I mean, it comes down to, again, when I look at this book and I think, how do I don't do stars, but how would I rate this? And it's hard to do because if I want to look at it under the lens of comparing it to what do I usually read, it's a different thing. This isn't Asimov or Philip K. Dick or
Mm-hmm.
Kurt Vonnegut. This is in the vein of the Hunger Games and things like that. And what are my expectations? I could sit and do a half-hour video on, let me slam this book and all the things that are wrong with it literarily, right? Or I could do another one and say, like, how much did I enjoy this book? I really enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I come at it from, is what made me enjoy it. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't the character development. It was the, we keep going back to what you said. It's the reward of this rich revenge story, and
Mm-hmm.
it delivers throughout. And the characters are, whether I can relate to them or not, they certainly deliver in terms of what they're meant to do. I
Yeah.
don't know why he likes her, but the fact that he and Shamin and her, they all get together, it's interesting. It's creative. It's something new that, I don't know if I'm sure it's been done in other things, but nothing that I've read.
I feel like a lot of the pieces have been done before, but the way everything was assembled and altogether, this is something new. Like mechas have been done before. Again, like this book reminded me of Hunger Games at so many different points, more so than just the love triangle. But altogether, it was a unique story and like set in this very like historical China inspired setting too was really unique. So I feel like all the pieces make it a really cool and fun, unique book, which I really respect. I did end up giving this 5 stars, despite the fact that there are things I can criticize about it. But I think it accomplished what it set out to do, and that to me is most important when it comes to reading a book.
And if you think about the reader, like the reader that is not going to like this book at all is the person that this book is probably not for, right?
Exactly.
And it's probably not the person I would recommend it to, but somebody who picks up this book having at least some broad idea of what it's about, it's like, this is YA and this is for, I'm just gonna have a fun reading experience and be turning pages. Like it really does that. And again, I would criticize like some of the stuff that felt like really Hunger Games for me, like the wardrobe, like, oh, we're gonna reveal this, like that just, I didn't care for that. And I felt a little bit shortchanged on China. Like one of the things that I liked about this, like, oh, great, there's going to be like, I don't expect this to teach me anything about Chinese history or anything like that, but I would have liked some of that. I would have liked to give a little bit more of an ambiance other than just knowing that there's the Great Wall, right? That was something that I felt I would have seen more of in the book, and I felt shortchanged, but it didn't change how much, the main point of the book and the reason I read the book, which is to have a fun, turn off my brain a little bit and just watch this revenge story. And it certainly did that. And I think it's 5 stars in that regard.
I think one of the historical things that I really enjoyed that was put in this book was the foot binding. And it was exceptionally gruesome to read about. It's something I knew that, was part of Chinese culture in the past. Unfortunately, they don't do it anymore because it is debilitating. But for me, it really showed the reality of it. When I learned about it, I could kind of understand that this was a horrific like body modification, but I didn't understand how it would pretty much never heal, and that you couldn't walk, you couldn't run with this.
Yeah.
Like she is pretty
and
much
the brutality
disabled
of it,
from
how
it.
they do it.
Yeah.
Breaking all the bones. Like I didn't know that. I thought bound feet, like I had an idea of what it was, and it was not nice. But the book made it's something that did happen in the book that makes me go and like, okay, I want to look this up and see how do they actually do this. And it was, I mean, it's so brutal. Like the way she explains it with her grandmother, and then the soaking and all of that. Yeah.
And the like upkeep of it too. Throughout the book, she soaks her feet. She has to clean her wrappings, and there's points where her feet are just bleeding, even though it's been years since she's first had it done. To me, I love that, and that really like contextualized this, because it's hard for me to like fully understand just from like reading an article about it. But like
that's great. That's a great point, though. I thinking about that, that is something I really like about the story. The fact that it continues, that throughout it's not sort of abandoned in terms of the significance of it.
Absolutely, yeah. It really sticks with it, and then she is disabled because of it, but she's still very capable. She is pretty much wheelchair bound at the end. She can still walk, but like like if she walks, it causes her great physical pain and her feet bleed. So she kind of just uses the wheelchair instead. But you don't see her as this like weak person though. And she can still be like this very fiery, like revenge bound person while still being in a wheelchair. And I love that. That was like amazing disability rep, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like if her chi develops further, will it be something where like she can keep part of her chi on, and that's gonna, is that something like she's gonna be walking better because she has her feet wrapped in chi spirit armor even when she's not in battle or something, like I'd be curious. I'm curious about that. Or will we see her in the sequel? Will it be like she's getting around with a cane and in the wheelchair most of the time?
It'd be interesting to see, and I feel like, since you mentioned like key armor, for me personally, I had a hard time understanding Ki. I kind of just like generally accepted that this is some sort of magic system. I'm not a big fantasy person, so the magic elements were a little like pretty much just me being like, okay, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
I really didn't understand much of it. But pretty much
I just took it
anytime.
at that chi was your inner spirit, and that we all have this inner spirit inside of us, and that even in real world application, I don't think, obviously not to this degree, but I think there
Mhm.
are people that do believe in your inner chi and the energy that you give off. If you're around somebody happy, they're giving off the positive energy. I think that's adjacent to chi,
Mhm.
but in the story, I think it's an expansion of, we can tap into that, and then whatever our spirit lords, I forget what the wise ones or whatever they call them, the whoever they that help us create with these metal husks, these chrysalises, somehow when you're inside of them, it taps into something, they log in your spine and they can meld together, and the chi
Yeah.
flows. But yeah, I mean, that's just a suspend disbelief kind of. When I first started reading this too, that's where I was like, oh, okay, this isn't as much science fiction as I thought I read. This
Mhm.
is really more of a fantasy. But I think the book is squarely placed as a science fiction book and is
Mhm.
promoted as such. And I can accept that. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But certainly, yeah, with the involvement of chi, that takes it from, you take the chi out and it's clearly science fiction, right?
Right,
But just
absolutely.
that, and that the chi is a huge part of this, so clearly that moves us into fantasy realm.
Yeah. I I think it has a like important role in it, obviously, with like that being the reason why these female pilots will be killed off because their cheese all sapped out. So I like that incorporation, but it did kind of feel overwhelming at times, and it's like, okay, so like it can be used to like maneuver these metal suits, and it can be used to alter these metal suits, and you can like produce elements too depending on like what kind of chi you
Mm-hmm.
have. So I think all of that was just very, and it
Yeah,
felt like Zhao was like explaining it throughout the book too. Like even like at the very end, like there would be like a little tidbit about Key, and it was
yeah,
just like it was never really fully explained in my mind. It might be because it is such a fantasy element, and like I said, I don't really do
yeah.
fantasy. I have a hard time following like really heavy
Same.
fantasies. So that I guess I can like accept that maybe that's just like a me thing and not necessarily a
Yeah,
problem with the book, but for other like heavy science fiction readers who don't really do fantasy, that's something to know about it going
yeah,
into it, that it did feel a bit overwhelming at times.
yeah. I think it was a little obstacle for me at first, but I think it was just something like, okay, I'm just gonna get over that and like accept it for what it's worth. I'm not gonna try to figure it out exactly because I feel like I know enough of what it's supposed to be, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
just gonna and you do that in science fiction too. How many times are we reading a sci-fi book and we're like, okay, this is doesn't quite make sense, but does it fit into the world that the authors created?
Right.
Does this work in that world? And I think it fits that. I think it does. I think she's created this world where that exists, and it's true. There's nothing where it steps outside of being true to that. There's a couple of things that you might question with the size of some of the Hunduns, in terms of the grandest ones. That gets a
Mm-hmm.
little bit fantastical to the
It
extreme.
definitely is. But that goes back into self indulgence, I think, too.
Yeah,
That it's like, okay, you got like these awesome, like large monsters we're fighting, and we're in like these awesome large
yeah.
suits too. So for me, that's all just self
I feel like I
indulgence.
could pick that one apart for a while, and I'm just like, you know what? It's in this world. It's gonna
Just
fit.
go
All
with
right,
it.
cool. I'm just gonna accept that and keep enjoying the story.
Right? Yeah. I'm trying to think what else. Okay, I did couples. Oh, okay. I One of the things I loved about this, and I think works so well with science fiction, is the presence of media in this book and how the fights are all captured on film and
With
people
the
are
drones.
watching them. Yeah, absolutely loved that. It did remind me of Hunger Games because it is very like Hunger Games has that similar theme of like we're using violence as entertainment, you know, and that's what this is. But it also is so brilliant for me because it's like the perfect propaganda for this war. You know, that like we're watching these mecha fights and these pilots who pilot them, they're heroes, you know, like everyone adores them. They have all this like these women who take care of them, and you know, like they got all like these women lovers. Like it's glamorizes it so naturally that I absolutely understand why boys are constantly enlisting for this.
Yeah.
And I feel like it has so much to say about like, you know, how military in our world recruits through propaganda too. You know, if you only show the good parts of war and you always just think of them as heroes, like obviously people are gonna want to enlist for that sort of
Mm-hmm.
heroism. And on the flip side, with the women who don't really have much choice in life, it's either get married and have babies or enlist as these like female pilots that are probably going to die unless by some miracle they end up being a balanced match. It it makes so much sense, and I think um like that half of it also speaks to how many people end up enlisting in the army because they don't have any other chance in life.
Yeah.
You know, I've known many people who are like, I can't afford college, so I'm gonna go to war and fight. And you know, if I make it out of there, I'll get tuition for college and might get a job. You know, but I might die too, which is
And
the
in this
flip
case, you get
side.
celebrity. You know, I think them becoming
Exactly.
being celebrities ramps up the reward that we get when she
Hmm.
exacts her revenge, because it's not just some nobody she's getting revenge against. You know, this is, oh, it's the esteemed such and such celebrity who's, you know, the drones have captured this guy in fights numerous times, and everybody knows who this superstar is. So when she exacts her revenge on that person, you know, the reward is even greater because it's such a meaningful and bigger target.
Absolutely, yeah.
Did we get something in the chat? Looks like
We
maybe a
did.
question.
Joan, it is interesting to hear a very different view of one of my favorite books. This is why I ended up reading it because Joan spoke so highly of this book. Chi is a medical thing, and I think very sci fi. The Force in Star Wars was based on Chi. Yeah. I kind of got that sense. Not that that this was inspired by Star Wars, but I'm just like there's sci-fi that does have like that kind of magic,
Yeah,
like the Force
the
in Star
Force. Yeah,
Wars.
I would still say
Uh,
though, to me, that's you know, the Force. You know, yes, Star Wars is sci-fi, just like Star Trek. You have Q, who is this powerful being, and there's a magical element there. I just think those are fantastical elements of sci-fi, and I think sci-fi can have that. This is definitely a sci-fi book. You've got your mechs, and you've got obviously
Absolutely.
the twisty ending, but it has magicalist, fantastical elements, and that's not to uh, not say that there isn't, you know, some scientific elements in terms of measuring human energy and what might be referred to as chi. That's above my pay grade, and but I
Right.
accept that, you know, we do, you know, there are some studies into life forces and energies and things like that that, you know, are maybe a little over my head. Uh, but yeah, it doesn't make something not science fiction because there is a force or something that feels more fantastical. You know, one of my favorite books is Babel 17 by Samuel Delany, which is a great book. And I mean, some of the stuff in there, you know, some of the characters, even, you know, discorporated beings and things like that. Yeah, I mean, like ghosts, basically. It's okay. They're, you know, science fiction can have those things, and they're not always clear cut. Like, you know, this is science fiction, so you can't have that. This is fantasy, you can't have that. Sometimes it's
Right.
nice to see that blend. This was just one that just, you know, like you said, it felt a little bit more magical, and
Hmm.
I didn't mind it. It just took me a minute to get my bearings with it.
Absolutely. Fun fact, I studied Asian religion as my minor in college. Awesome. I think Iron Widow makes more sense if you already know a fair bit of Chinese history, religion, and culture. Yeah, I
I
feel
can see
like
that.
I might have better. appreciation. Not that I didn't appreciate this book, but to me, any of those references didn't feel obvious, except for the foot binding, because that was something I already knew about, like Chinese history. Um, but that would be awesome to learn more about the ways history and culture and religion were incorporated into this book. My final notes: I do have to head out, but I work at a Chinese medicine school, and we have Kui Gong, which I'm so sorry if I butchered that word, which is medical working with Qi. Also highly suggest subbing to Xiran's YouTube channel. I do know that they do YouTube. I haven't seen any of their videos yet, but
I'll
I'm
have to check
sure
that out.
they probably talk a lot about the influences of this book, which does sound very interesting. Thanks for joining us, Joan, if you haven't left already. Really appreciate your input, and I'd love to hear more about the ways that the Chinese culture and this book overlapped.
Yeah, I'll have to check out that YouTube channel. I didn't know that she had a YouTube channel. I know that I followed her on Twitter because there's some really great. I hadn't heard of this author before, but apparently she's very popular and outside of this book too. And on her Twitter, there's some really great fan art. So, and I reached out to some of the artists and to ask for permission to use some of the artwork to promote that in whenever I do my put up my review of Iron Widow. So I'm excited about that. But like, if you go on her Twitter,
awesome.
and you scroll through, there's some really cool. It's a book that really lends itself to having great fan art made when you think about the chrysalises and great characters. I could just, Yi with his tattoos. I think there's just a lot of creativity you could come up with for that.
Absolutely, yeah. I would love to see more of the fan art for that. And you're right, it feels like it is so like palatable for fan art, just trying to conceptualize this world, because I feel like it is such a stylized world in the first place, That's awesome. I'm really looking forward to your review too of Iron Widow too. So if you haven't subscribed to Fit to Be Read, go ahead and do so. I should have your channel linked in the description below.
Thanks, Robin.
Oh, thanks for hosting. This is really interesting. Also, they do some great social media platforms. But no, they do use they, them pronouns. That's what I thought. And they have an amazing TikTok. Thank you, Joan, for joining us. Thank you so much. Yeah, I thought they used they, them pronouns, but I wasn't sure. I was a little surprised at how like gendered this book was, considering that this came from a non-binary author. Not that they're like restricted to write in like these non-gender conforming stories, but it did feel very divisive, and I was almost expecting there to be more outliers in like this like strict like male versus female world. Like honestly, I actually thought Ximin, I thought he was trans at first. Because he was so
Ximin or Yi?
No, Ximin. Because of how hostile everyone was towards him and how shunned he was, I almost felt like maybe this background came from like him deciding to transition and everyone kind of shunning him for that, and also because there's like a small mention of him having period products in his room, and for me I was like, oh, like is he trans? Like that would be so cool to see.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Kind of.
Yeah, I just kind of bought into the story of it was somebody else's, but like that, yeah, that didn't even cross my mind. But that's it. That would be an interesting take.
Yeah, I don't think Zhao ended up going with that, but like, that was my thought at first. I really would like to see something like that, especially because it is this super like gender conforming world. I would love to see some outliers that, don't buy into their assigned genders. I hope that's something that's explored in the next book. But again, like just because the author's trans doesn't mean that they're required to write stories like that. It's just something I love to see in science fiction, and that I think has become so palatable in science fiction as we progress too.
Definitely.
Any other points you might have?
No, and I mean, I really appreciate this. I'm getting a little close to being a little crunched on time, but
Yeah.
I really appreciate that we got to do this together. It was really fun to like read this and then also have a buddy to, kind of say, oh, this is what I think, and to kind of do that along the way, and then to have it culminate in this conversation, I think is great. And I enjoyed the book, but I like even more the experience of it,
Mm-hmm.
because I can take this in hindsight with the things that you were saying, and applying it frames it even in a way that's even more enjoyable for me. So thank you.
Absolutely, and I feel the exact same way. I love doing buddy reads because it is such an enriching experience, and it's really cool to do one with you because I know you read a lot of classic science fiction too. So to have you come from that sort of
It was a
mindset
great
more
change of pace.
is absolutely. I've been trying to read more classic science fiction this year. So definitely hit me up if you want to do another buddy read because
Definitely.
they make it so much more fun, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
For all our viewers, again, if you haven't subscribed yet to Michael, please do so. Again, he reads a lot of science fiction. He does a lot of reviews. He incorporates fan art into his reviews. They're really awesome. So his channel is in the description below.
Thanks,
And
Robin.
thank you so much for coming today. Thank you, Michael.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.